Hi, Andrew Hoffman here. Pretty interesting stories flying around that are, I think, happening more rapidly with all the AI that's running in the background. A lot of these classified documents that have been out there for a long time, or analysis that's been taken from space, like the strange observations under the Giza pyramids and the Giza plateau. And a lot of speculation there. Don't know what it is. There's a water table that is kind of there from the Nile River that would kind of interrupt large chambers underneath the Giza plateau. But there are things that are observed, and speculation has long been out there that you have to pay attention to as far as news stories. And with AI crawling in the background and analyzing all this stuff that's on the internet, the information that just observation, speculation, or facts, you're getting a massive amount of news stories that are coming out very rapidly these days. And one of those is a declassified document coming out of the CIA that explained that the Ark of the Covenant had been found. And it's off the official CIA website, and it's part of their remote viewing Stargate program that they've had, I guess in the 80s, 1988. Specifically, they had a remote viewer who was able to locate the Ark of the Covenant, and that's now out. And of course, the Ark of the Covenant, if you know the movie Raiders of the Lost Ark, it's what it's about. If you know the Bible, it's the ark that they had built to hold the Ten Commandments, and it's all kinds of legendary discussions about it. I like these stories a lot. I enjoy them immensely. One of my favorite books of all time is Graham Hancock's Sign and the Seal. I think it's a brilliant work for him. If you know him, he's an investigative journalist who looks into archaeology issues, and he's on a quest as a journalist to uncover evidence of ancient civilizations, civilizations that are older than our historic record typically associates and identifies. So he got involved in these things because of the book, The Sign and the Seal. He had been an investigative journalist up to that point for current events, for like a magazine like The Economist. And he worked the Ethiopian beat. And there were lots of stories in that remote part of the world that the Ark of the Covenant had been there and was there. So if you don't travel in that part of the world, you probably wouldn't hear the stories, but he did. And he did a lot of investigations, and the point of the book and The Sign and the Seal was to uncover enough evidence to show that the Ark of the Covenant likely had been transported to Ethiopia, where the Queen of Sheba had a relationship with King Solomon, and that their son had taken the Ark there because there was a lot of hostilities occurring, and they wanted to preserve the Ark because they were afraid that the temple was going to be raided, which it eventually was. It took the next generation to have that kingdom divide up and war break out, but to protect the Ark, the son, by stories that had been passed around, they took the Ark and preserved it in went to several places, but it eventually ended up in a temple, a little chapel that they built in Axum, and it resides there to this day. And at the end of the book, Graham Hancock found his way to that location, and it sort of stopped at the gate. The famous traveler that does a lot of shows, Expedition Unknown, he also did an investigation into the Ark of the Covenant and found his way to the same spot, probably because of Graham's book. And he couldn't get past the gates because there's one guy that kind of guards it, and you can't go further. And they elect somebody to kind of guard the Ark for the rest of their life, and then when they die, they elect somebody else and they take up the mantle and they just pass it on. It's been like that for centuries, and it's occurring even to this day. So it's an interesting story, and I thought That was cool, and that's probably a likely scenario. I don't know how much of the ark was made out of wood. It's got gold wrapped around it and silver and all kinds of things. And inside it's supposed to be the contents of the original 10 Commandments that were given to Moses. Again, the popular movie Raiders of the Lost Ark was it's world known and very famous, and it's a very entertaining thing to think about as far as biblical relics. And I personally think the ark is significant because without the original 10 Commandments, that essentially made modern civilization possible because the rules of conduct allowed mankind to advance. So the power of the ark, as far as I'm concerned, whether it's a physical object, whether it's a out of place object, something that was brought here from some of the culture, maybe not even from the planet, associated with God and written in the Bible in a way that human people could reflect such things. I think the true magic of it is the intellectual enterprise of creating 10 rules that can make civilization stable. And I think that's the real trick behind it. So regardless of whether it's a physical object or a piece of literature, to create a literary narrative, I'm not sure to this day if something that's 3,500 years old, because it would have been made around 1500 BC. It's a very old object, and it's something over 3,000 years old. There probably wouldn't be much left of it. Some of the gold would be preserved, but the wood and all the other aspects of it, I don't think much would be. So I'm not sure what's in that little church at Axum or what they think it is. It could be anything. But what makes this story interesting is now this story come out that the CIA had done remote viewing, and they really didn't know. This is before Graham Hancock did his story, his book, came out in 1992. And 1988, they had CIA remote viewers, and I think remote viewing is a real thing. I've talked about it before. I think it's an element of science that can be unleashed through quantum mechanics, and it's a technology we have only tapped the beginnings of as far as resource understanding. What's interesting about remote viewing, if you think about radio waves or 5G waves that pass through towers for internet service, there's a lot of invisible stuff flying around. And the particles that carry the information aren't really understood, even though we've been able to utilize them. The idea of quantum memory and how those particles fly around us, how many neutrinos, since I've been talking to you, have passed through my body at likely faster than the speed of light. These are all things that we're still uncovering, but we're beginning to have quantum storage where you pack a lot of memory on clouds, and we compress that stuff into very small spaces. So there's when you start dealing with quantum entanglement, how information gets passed from one place to another, we don't always want to assume that time is linear. Time could be all kinds of things depending on relative to your position around the universe. So when we start talking about remote viewing, I think what we're dealing with is utilization of quantum entanglement. And that people not everybody's good at it. And I don't say that every time the CIA tried to do it with their Gateway project, that they were successful every time. I think really good ones were successful maybe 50% of the time, but they certainly weren't 100% of the time successful. But what's interesting is that through this viewing, they identified the circumstances that the Ark would have been held in that little place in Axum and the conditions for which it was kept. And it was enough to be compelling as an independent source. So when everyone's asking, what do you think about that? These are some fantastic stories, and you like talking about those types of topics. I do, and I think they're certainly interesting. And as far as scientific proof, well, I mean, when your method of measure is still evolving, it's hard to say that something is true or not or to understand what that measure means if you don't understand completely the science behind it. But that it happens, or can happen, I think is more of a validation of its essence, that the CIA had been trying to find ways to spy on people and get to know people and see what they're up to from a remote distance. I think a lot of times we have ghost encounters, or that you feel like you got a little shadow man in your bedroom. I think 80% of most people believe in some sort of paranormal activity. I wouldn't say that all that activity is ghosts. I think some of that activity is somebody viewing you through quantum entanglement, and that they're a conscious entity. They could be in the future, they could be in the past, but they could be talking to you in real time, intersecting with your plane of reality. And they're as real as we're talking now. It doesn't necessarily have to be in your time on your watch. I don't think that quantum entanglement works like that. I think it works through other kinds of particle science that we're still untangling through quantum physics. So I think there's a lot of probability that what we're this story about the Ark of the Covenant is probably true. And it only validates what I suspect is based on the good work that Graham Hancock did as far as finding the Ark of the Covenant in the world. The most logical place it would have been, and the detective work he did to get there. I think I've thought that it's been there in Axum all along. I think the Josh Gates episode that he did, Expedition Unknown, or before he, whatever his Destination Truth, or whatever one of those cable programs was that he did the investigation into finding the Ark of the Covenant, because he was inspired because of the movie Raiders of the Lost Ark, and everybody's been trying to find the real Ark of the Covenant since that movie was so popular. And people have been trying to find it forever anyway, because they're fans of the references to it in the Bible. But what does it all mean when it comes down to where its actual location was? And I thought that Axum, Ethiopia, is the most logical place for it to be. And whatever's left of it is probably there. And I do believe that the Solomon Sheba story, the son of their union, took it there. Makes perfect sense why no one's ever found it since, because the temple was pillaged by Romans and by Nebuchadnezzar and all kinds of other invaders of Jerusalem from the time of Solomon to the current. So if it was hidden in some little tunnel somewhere underneath in one of those tunnels, you probably would have been found by now. It would have been talked about as being such a famous relic in the treasures of Nebuchadnezzar. They looted from the area. The fact that the Ark of the Covenant was nowhere to be found, any other reference in the future, indicates that it moved from that field of concentration. And Ethiopia would be a good place to go, because Sheba, the Queen of Sheba, was outside King Solomon's realm, outside the Near East, just enough to be obscure. And it's enough of a remote culture to this day that most of the world doesn't pay much attention to what's going on there, and it's a perfect place to hide something. And I think a lot of church leaders who know about it, Jewish faithful, there's a very dedicated Jewish faith among the Ethiopians that would be a continuation of that cycle. So what do I think about it? I think the remote viewing is probably true. I think the CIA definitely poked around at all those things. I think we're getting a lot of information that's been classified for a long time, coming out quickly because the Trump administration is declassifying everything, and it's exciting to see this avalanche of stuff coming out. But this isn't new news. It's just now it's coming out in ways that we can consume the information because there's decentralized platforms that can talk about them, as opposed to waiting for Newsweek to tell you about it, or National Geographic. Now we have things come out on X and True Social and a million podcasts, and people are talking about stuff that's been out there at a rapid rate because people are willing to consume it. And now these stories are getting some attention that they probably should always had, but they're getting them now. And so I do think it's true. I think the remote viewing of the Ark of the Covenant, and that we found it, but don't necessarily possess it in some warehouse in the middle of the desert somewhere. It's probably still right where the remote viewing saw it. The CIA chronicled it, wrote it down, made a document that's official report on the government website, and you can read it for yourself by going online. And I think that the method of discovery is a valid one that will continue to uncover for many years to come, because it's a good way to obtain information through quantum entanglement. And the more we utilize that technology, so just like we've learned to use radio waves and ways to pass information with the internet, bounce around all over the place, a lot of information flying around that you can't see with your physical eyes, but yet they're there. And I think when you unravel the methods of quantum entanglement, what you can do with it doesn't necessarily have to be tied to time and space, but other aspects of higher dimensional reality that we can tap into and use for our efforts. And one of those efforts is the science of remote viewing. And I think it's not a hokey kind of thing. It's more of a scientific kind of thing. It's only hokey because we don't have definitions of science to apply to it. But that the CIA was able to use it and have some success with it, maybe at a 50% ratio, is something that we have to consider when we're talking about these things. And when it comes to the Ark of the Covenant, I think they did find it. And I think it's a story that will continue to unravel through time. And it's gonna be very interesting to discover. But as far as the location of the Ark of the Covenant, I think it's there in Axum. And I think there's a compelling story that will eventually emerge from that part of the world. And it will be very healthy for our perspective on history. Anyway, it's Rich Hoffman here. Share, subscribe, make tomorrow a better day. If you haven't read my book, The Gunfighter's Guide to Business, I think you'll love it. Anyway, have a good day. See you later.